huli hangout that's about to go dry, and you can be an everyday hero and save a life. It's easier than you think, and we'll tell you how.
RNZ News at 5. I'm Marama Tipole. The Energy Minister, Megan Woods, has blamed last night's power cuts on commercial decisions made by the electricity companies. Thousands of New Zealanders were left in the dark on one of the coldest nights of the year after their power was intentionally cut to reduce strain on the system. Ms Woods pointed the finger at Genesis Energy in particular for failing to turn on its third generator despite having been warned there would be massive demand.
If we did have a situation where there was such a constraint of the generation of electricity in New Zealand, so New Zealanders could not be sure of their ability to keep the lights on and the heater on, then we have some serious questions to be asked.
Megan Woods says the grid operator Transpower also appears to have overreacted in how much power it demanded to be taken out of the system. Napier resident Jean McDonald was just about to cook dinner when her power went out, and she says she would have appreciated prior notice.
I was angry. I thought this day and age of modern technology, they could have sent a multiple text out. If it was something they wanted, they would do that, just to let you know. And I could have, had a few things put in line and be prepared for it.
Genesis says Transpower did not ask it for more electricity until just after 5 o'clock last night on the cusp of the evening peak demand. The company says it did increase supply at its Tauranga site, but gale force winds earlier in the day had pushed wheat into the intake at the plant, which ultimately tripped, losing 115 megawatts of generation. It says elsewhere it was operating at full capacity. The COVID-19 response minister says piecemeal information from officials about what happened with the container ship Rio de la Plata is frustrating. More than 90 Port of Tauranga workers spent time on board the vessel, which was carrying crew infected with COVID-19. Only 9 workers were fully vaccinated. Mr Hipkins says 3 main agencies made decisions: Customs, Local Public Health and the Ministry of Health.
So one of the things that I am a bit frustrated by is that this information does seem to have been late in being shared. So I only first found out about this on Sunday night, for example. So I've got some questions there, and we'll be looking pretty closely at who knew what and when.
All but one of the 110 tests taken from workers at the Port of Tauranga have returned negative. The remaining one is being retested but is considered low risk. The Climate Change Minister, James Shaw, says the IPCC report on climate change should be a wake-up call. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, most comprehensive report to date, warns the world could heat by 1.5 degrees Celsius in just 10 years. The report found every inhabited region on Earth is likely to experience frequent extreme weather as temperatures rise. Mr Shaw says it underscores the need for urgent action.
The government's response to this is the emissions reduction plan, and I think that this report should put more pressure on agencies and on the private sector and on councils all around the country to actually pull finger and get into action.
James Shaw says response to climate change over the past 30 years has been woeful. The head of Cycling New Zealand has paid tribute to Olympian Olivia Podmore, who died suddenly yesterday. Podmore competed at both the Rio Olympics and the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games in 2018. Cycling New Zealand Chief Executive Jacques Landry says he's deeply saddened by her death.
Right now our hearts really go out to the families, the athletes, the friends that were so close to her. For us right now, the focus is really to make sure that the health and well-being of those people are well taken care of, and we'll continue to endeavour to make sure that is done until we're satisfied.
On Monday, Podmore posted a since-deleted emotional message on social media talking about the pressures of high-performance sport. It's 5:04. The Silver Ferns coach, Dame Nolene Tauranga, says she's excited at the prospect of teenage goal shoot sensation Grace Wiki taking the court for the national side. Wiki was a key factor in the Northern Mystics ANZ Premiership title win, and Tauranga says while she has been part of the National Development Programme for some time, Wiki's made great strides over the past few months. Tauranga knew Wiki was ready for the step up when she saw how she performed against the Tactics Silver Fern defenders Jane Watson and Karen Berger in the ANZ Premiership final.
Not only is her engine improved, but also physically she's very strong and she has improved in that area. So I think when you add all those ingredients to her natural ability of being aerial and with 50 plus goals per game, that's definitely a weapon for us. That I'm so excited to see what's going to happen when she does take the court.
Halfback Brad Weber says the lesson the All Blacks have had reinforced in the opening Bledisloe Cup test is that the Wallabies are pesky buggers who simply never give up. The All Blacks won 33-25 but were up 33-8 midway through the first half, only for the Wallabies roar back with 3 tries in the final 10 minutes.
They're pesky buggers, they don't go away. And we sort of learned that in Super Rugby as well. Like, even when you think you've got them toast, or if you think you've got them beat, they just keep coming. They've got the confidence and the willingness to keep coming at you right to the 80th minute.
And that's the news.
Electricity users cautioned.
It's possible that we may have further brownouts during this cold weather.
It is not our intent to reduce demand and cut the lights out.
Unvaccinated port workers on notice.
I've said that I'm not at all happy with the level of vaccination at the port. Our approach was to educate and to inform. We've now made it a requirement.
The world on notice.
The effects of climate change are happening now, and it is a catastrophe that's unfolding here in Aotearoa.
We've been warned again. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Then on night.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel in the central high country. A few showers clearing for south of Auckland tomorrow evening. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine, but isolated showers tomorrow afternoon or evening. Whanganui to Wellington and also Wairarapa, generally fine. Some morning cloud tomorrow and the odd early shower about inland Whanganui and Manawatu. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine, apart from some cloudy areas in Canterbury today with the odd shower in the south. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, occasional rain in Fiordland, cloudy periods and a few showers elsewhere. Otago and Southland, partly cloudy, isolated showers becoming fine tomorrow, apart from showers about Stewart Island. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional showers, southwest gales easing this evening. It's 5:07.
Thanks, Marama. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Energy Minister is calling out the power companies, saying last night's rolling blackouts on one of the coldest nights of the year were entirely preventable. Thousands of households were plunged into darkness when power generators deliberately pulled the plug to manage electricity demand, which had reached an all-time high. But it appears all-important power generation backups were not up and running, despite plenty of warning a cold snap was on its way. Amy Williams reports.
The power went out without warning, leaving thousands with no time to fill their hot water bottles or find torches. Jean McDonald lives in Napier, Taradale, and was just about to cook dinner. When she later found out the blackout was deliberate, she saw red.
I was angry. I thought, this day and age of modern technology, they could have sent a multiple text out. If it was something they wanted, they would do that, just to let you know. And I could have had a few things put in line and be prepared for it.
She would have liked some notice.
It's just, the lack of information and the fact that in today's modern technology, we shouldn't have power cuts. It took me back to my childhood in the 50s when we had power cuts.
When the power went out, Stokes Valley resident Helen Pentecost drove to be with her 99-year-old father, who lives nearby.
It did come as a bit of a surprise to me that we were that short of power in the country that we had to do this.
Demand hit an all-time high of 7,100 megawatts between 6 o'clock and 6:30 last night. The Huntly power station was not running at full capacity. Genesis did not have its third coal-fired Rankine operating. Added to that, the power link between the North and South Islands was at half capacity. Energy Minister Megan Wood says the situation was preventable.
Yes, I think it was. This wasn't a physical constraint of generation. We did have the ability to physically generate the amount of electricity that were needed to keep the lights and the heaters on for New Zealanders last night, but commercial decisions were made not to.
She's asked MB to probe what went wrong and oversee a response, including how to better inform consumers when the power's about to be cut.
People might want to boil the jug. People want to make sure that they've got things prepared and do deserve to have that forward planning. So this is one of the things that I've asked MB to take a coordination role on.
Transpower has apologised for the widespread rolling power cuts. The national grid operator says electricity demand touched an all-time high last night, and it asked providers to reduce their output. Meanwhile, wholesale electricity spot prices soared, reaching an average of $7,000 per megawatt hour, up from the usual $100. Molly Mellish, a consumer advocate for electricity, says that price spike will eventually filter through to household bills.
That price will probably be cut back, but it probably won't be cut back that far. So yes, I think that it will result in big profits, and people always see the result of excess profits on their bills sooner or later.
She says the winter weather was forewarned and power generators had time to ready their supply. As for tonight, milder weather is forecast and power use is not expected to reach yesterday's dinner time peak.
John Clark, Transpower's General Manager of Grid Development, says no system is perfect, but he's assuring customers electric blankets, heaters and lights will all stay on this evening.
The situation for tonight is different from last night. Last night we had more demand for electricity over the evening peak. Today we've had milder weather, and we've also had more work done on making sure there will be generation available tonight.
So last night, how many customers were without power for how long, and generally where were they?
Not quite. Just I've got someone with me. Jeff, do we know how many customers were roughly without power? 2,500 or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, there were a number of customers, typically around the middle and lower North Island, who were affected from around 7 o'clock through to about 8:30.
Okay, so who's responsible for what the Minister has deemed an unacceptable situation?
What we had last night was a record peak demand. First time we've had a new peak for the demand of electricity for some years. And in meeting that, there was not enough available generation. That's enough power going into the system to meet supply. Along with that, right at that peak time, we had one of the generators have an issue, which meant they reduced their output. We followed what is a process to make sure we continue to balance the power system. The last thing we wanted was a blackout, because the power system could no longer manage the amount of electricity that was coming off it. So we asked power companies to reduce demand by around 1 to 2%. People did that. Surely it would have been an inconvenience on a cold night, and we truly regret that. But as a result of that action, we were able to stabilise the power system and ensure everyone continues to receive electricity.
John, I'm going to repeat my question. Who was responsible for this?
It's not a clear case of responsibility. We will be doing an investigation.
So are you all equally at fault, John?
Well, there are a number of processes that we work through. One is that we advised the market that we thought that the situation was going to be tight last night. We sent out a number of notices and alerts. No power system is perfect, and there are times when, due to a range of circumstances, we might need to shed demand. That doesn't only happen in New Zealand, that happens in other places. Probably the last time something like this happened was in 2014.
Did you switch too many people off, though?
One of the
unnecessarily.
One of the things that we do regret is that one of our key processes failed us and did not work as well as it should. We were targeting a reduction in demand of around 1%. We actually achieved more like 2 to 3%. and that was due to a failure in terms of some of the information we provided out to the industry.
So, John, just to be clear, you actually turned off households that you didn't need to on a very cold and stormy night.
You've got to remember that in the control room, it's a very dynamic situation. You are trying to balance demand and supply and keep the power system from falling over. So if, as unfortunately happened here, you shed a little bit more than you needed, the upside was that the power system kept going.
So you did put out a notice to generators saying that you needed more power, basically. So why didn't they fire up and give you what you needed?
I guess in some cases we're aware some of the generation equipment is not available, or is certainly not available in a hurry, right? In other cases, people obviously elected that they weren't able to respond, and it's probably a question to ask some of the generators.
So what's your concern there? Were they trying to make more money out of the market?
Yeah, I can't really speculate on what their drivers are.
Do you have concerns that they had, well, commercial drivers, that they wanted the power of price to go up, so they were running things really close to the wire in order to get more money out of their customers?
Well, I would hope that wasn't the case. I would hope that we, as an industry, are working well together to make sure we ensure a reliable supply to all our customers.
Is this what customers in a first world country should expect from their power generators and power distributor?
There will be times where, unfortunately, something happens and we have to curtail supply. We try to make sure we avoid that whenever we can by communicating with the industry and having the right protocols and procedures in place. As I said, we will look into this incident and make sure we understand how we and the industry could respond better.
And that's John Clark from Transpower. It is almost 17 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora watu mo te whakarongo mai. Haere ake nei, coming up, who is responsible for the flip-flopping advice over a cargo ship that had contact with COVID. The Energy Minister's really sparked up over the blackout, pointing the finger at power generator Genesis for potentially cashing in on a supply shortage. Megan Woods reckons the company has got some serious explaining to do.
What I can tell you is that this appears to have been a commercial constraint rather than a physical constraint in terms of generation. The third Rankine at Huntly was not turned on because Genesis made a decision that there wasn't going to be that much demand in the system. This is obviously something that I'm continuing to ask questions on. This wasn't a physical constraint of generation. We did have the ability to physically generate the amount of electricity that were needed to keep the lights and the heaters on for New Zealanders last night, but commercial decisions were made not to.
Now, with us to answer some of the issues raised there by the Minister is Genesis Chief Executive Mark England. Mark, anyone you want to apologise to start off with?
Kia ora, Lisa. Good evening. Well, obviously, all the customers that had their power cut off last night, I think as a sector, we let them down, and we'll learn from this and make sure it doesn't happen again.
OK, in terms of the role you played in this, can you talk us through the commercial decisions that you made that the Minister said, led to this in part?
Yeah, well, we feel this is grossly unfair, the Minister, to single out one company. We're a group of companies that keep the lights on across New Zealand every day. It wasn't a commercial decision, it was an operational decision. We looked at our portfolio yesterday and we knew that between all our customer demand and the generation we had online, we could meet our customer demand. And that's all we can see in the market. We don't get a picture of the whole market. We don't see whether there are supply gaps elsewhere, and you Transpower can see that. So we did what we always do, and we made sure we can meet our customer demand, and the consequences are well understood now.
So are you being scapegoated by the Minister?
Oh, absolutely. Genesis is just one of several generators, as I said, and we don't have any legal or regulatory accountability for security of supply in New Zealand. Our only accountability is to be sure we can supply our customers.
So, Mark, if it's not you who created this problem, then who is responsible? Whose fault is it?
Well, I do think as a sector we need to sit down and understand this, and we'll come up with some lessons learned. There's probably no single accountability. But Transpower are the company that have the overall visibility of the market and what's going on. And I think the Minister is ultimately accountable for energy security as a whole. There is no single company that is in New Zealand.
So why do you think she's singling you out, the Minister?
I have no idea. I will ask her tomorrow. I have a meeting with her that's been a long time in the diary, so I'll ask that question. But, it is what it is. We can only put our point across and, happy to do that.
The strong suggestion she is making is that you kept supply tight in order to benefit out of this commercially. Did you do that?
We actually lost a lot of money yesterday, so it's kind of the opposite. We wouldn't.
How much, Mark?
I'm not going to disclose that, but more than $1 million on being short in a difficult market. So when market conditions materialise like that, it's really tough on generators. We don't do it deliberately.
So can you give, sorry to interrupt, a rock-solid assurance that you did not keep supply tight in order to squeeze more money out of your customers?
I can give a rock-solid assurance. That's not the case. It doesn't work like that. If I could tell you what happened, we had managed and through the day worked out that we could meet our customer demand with the supply we had online. And two events contrived to happen at exactly the same time in the same half-hour period. The first was a bunch of weeds that is a continuous problem at the Takano power station in a lake called Lake Rotorua. Started to build up. We had really strong gale force southeasterly winds pushing that weeds towards our intake gate. We've been working all day to clear it, and normally we manage to clear it, and nothing is ever known about it. But yesterday the wind was too strong and it pushed too much weed towards the intake gate, and we had to downrate that power unit at that time. Almost the same time, a little bit later, the wind in New Zealand dropped to about half. So we had about 500 megawatts of wind blowing, and it dropped to about 260 megawatts quite quickly.
Okay,
That's
so those
what
are
caused the supply gap.
Those are two problems, Mark. The weeds, some people might say, that seems to be a pretty minor problem and why weren't you across it? But the other thing is that Transpower did stick out a notice saying, hey, we need more supply. We're expecting demand to be high. So what did you need from Transpower in order to deliver more, like firing up the other coal generator? What did you need?
We needed more warning. So at 6 o'clock yesterday morning, there was a notice that came out saying there was a risk, but that there was a 200 megawatt excess supply capacity, so we were okay, but there was a risk. By about 5:30 yesterday evening, that had turned into we've got a problem here, we need more generation quickly. For us to fire up that third unit that you're talking about, it takes about 6 to 10 hours. It's not a quick thing.
But if you had done it at 6:25, I'm just looking at the notice, or whenever it came out, it was 6:42 in the morning, the first notice from Transpower comes out, right? So you had almost 12 hours, which is plenty of time by your estimation to fire up that other coal unit. So why didn't you? But
that wasn't. Well, why didn't we? That wasn't a request on Genesis. That was an alert to the market that there was risk. When that happens, everyone looks at their own portfolio and says, "What's our demand? What do we forecast the risk to be for the evening peak?" And we make sure we've got enough units online, and we concluded we did.
So what's the protocol, Mark?
We can't see the whole market.
Yeah, so what's the protocol, Mark? Do you expect someone from Transpower to pick up the phone and say, hey, we've got a really bad situation here, can you fire up? Is that what the normal protocol would be, or what is it?
Or if a warning had been issued earlier, requesting directly Genesis or any other company to bring more into the market, we might have been able to react. That might be one of the lessons that's learned here. But we can't react within an hour. One of the things about these Rankine units is they're old beasts. They take 6 to 10 hours to ramp up. They're not peakers. They can't be turned on quickly, and they can't react to short-term outages.
So the general call to arms wasn't enough for you?
Not in this case, and there's been about 5 of those this month. So this is a regular occurrence. Well, because this is a regular occurrence. We often get these notices. It's not abnormal. And we manage our own portfolio like every other company does. So, look, with the benefit of hindsight, we'll look at this and go, well, if we had that unit up and running, we would have been in a better position as a company and a better position as a market. But at that point in time, we made the decision with the information we had.
Okay, because the Minister has said, well, the storm warning should have been enough for you to fire up. A particularly cold night, a storm heading on the way. She says that the expectation from New Zealanders is that you would have fired that up. Is she wrong?
Well, it doesn't work like that. There's storms, quite often there are storms. That's not necessarily the only input we have. We look at the demand forecast. We have good modelling for it. And as I said, when we looked at our portfolio, we knew we could meet our demand. And what happened last night, once those two events happened, I mentioned the wind and Takana Power Station, is when Transpower initiated the call to start rolling blackouts across 3 different networks. It was probably a little bit of overkill in the end, because we were then asked to downrate some of our generation. So we actually had to take generation down at Huntley in order to manage lower demand. So we were seesawing around quite a lot, and I think there'll be a lot of lessons about that too.
So what compensation are you offering your customers?
Oh, we haven't thought about that yet.
Will you be compensating them?
Maybe. We'll get into that. We had about 70,000
Why only maybe,
customers.
Mark?
Well, we don't know what it's cost them yet, so we'll look at that. We'll obviously look at that. We had about 70,000
Arguably,
customers.
it's cost them a cold, dark night, Mark. Are they not due any compensation for that?
Yeah, they probably are due. They're due. There's a minimum apology, and beyond that, we'll see what we can do. But remember, we as Genesis are not the only ones accountable for energy security. We're just one part of the market.
Okay, so name me the other people who you think are equally as accountable to you for what happened last night. So,
well, every other single generator in the market, you can name them all. Contact didn't have TCC running, which is a large unit in Tauranga. We don't know what Mercury and Meridian were doing, whether they could have put more water into the system. Again, we don't see the whole picture.
So are you all equally to blame here, including Transpower, and you also named the Minister as the person responsible for energy supply. So are you all, including the Minister, equally to blame for what happened last night?
Yeah, there's definitely a shared accountability, and I think we need to all get around as an industry around the table and work out what we can learn from this. In these situations, it's rare that it's one company, but yeah, we've let our customers down, and we need to sort it out.
So why haven't you spoken to the Minister yet?
I think she's been busy in Parliament, but I'm seeing her tomorrow.
So you do not accept the criticism that she has levelled at you, one iota, none of it?
Absolutely not.
Not one bit of it?
Well, other than our part in a market that has let customers down. But we're just one generator, as I said. We did our best, and we believed we could meet the needs of our customers, but something went wrong.
So why do you think she's got this situation so wrong, then?
Well, you'd have to ask her.
Well, I'm asking you for you.
I've explained how I see it and understand the difference in her narrative. But to pick one company out of a crowd and single them out as the problem doesn't make sense. I think perhaps one of the problems is these units at Huntley have got a bit of a brand. People can point to them and say, well, that's a Rankine unit. We've heard about that because that burns coal. And maybe it was a simple response to a quick question. But
so
really,
the Energy Minister doesn't understand exactly how the energy market works and the specifics around energy generation. The Energy Minister does not understand that. Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say that. I think it's a complex market. There's lots going on, and there's lots of nuances with it. And so I think once we've had a chance to review it, understand it and take some lessons from it, we'll be in a better position.
We're almost out of time, but what efforts did you take to warn your customers? You know, hospitals, people who are vulnerable, reliable on medical equipment, what effort did you put into letting them know that the lights could go out?
Well, we had very little warning too. So when Transpower enacted that action, we didn't know any more time ahead than anyone else did. But we did stand up our contact centre last night. We do look after our medically vulnerable customers. We know we had 177 of them in those regions. And we're following up with them with text messages to check they're okay today. And so, yeah, we're making sure we look after our customers, but we couldn't give them any warning because we didn't have any.
So are you telling us that you were as surprised as any customer when the lights went out?
Yes, because, again, we can only see our part of the market and our generation. We didn't know until Transpower issued that notice that there was a problem.
Really appreciate you joining us this evening. That is the Genesis Chief Executive, Mark England. Now, stay with us. The Energy Minister, Megan Woods, will be with us after 6 o'clock tonight. Homai o whakaaro, love your thoughts on all of this, especially if you were a customer, well, who had the lights go out and the electric blanket go off and then no go with the kettle. So get in touch. Pātui mai, you can text me on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Who do you reckon's responsible? The Minister is pointing the finger at Genesis. Genesis says it's being scapegoated. Transpower says, well, it did some things wrong. Well, who's to blame? And what happens next? It is 28 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Pressure is mounting on authorities to explain what happened with the flip-flopping health advice given to workers at the port of Tauranga. More than 70 workers spent time on board the Rio de la Plata container ship, which was carrying crew infected with COVID-19. Stevedores were stood down, then cleared to work, then stood down again, and it's emerged today that Australian health officials believe the ship is linked to a snap lockdown in Cairns. Chen Liu reports.
Maritime New Zealand received the alert about the ship, but later allowed it in, and the local health authority gave it permission to berth. But Customs then shut down operations. Port workers were stood down, then later cleared to work, then stood down again. Almost all workers tested yesterday have returned a negative result. However, one is getting retested because their result wasn't clear. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says how the transmission might have happened is still under investigation.
That's all being investigated at the moment. I don't have a detailed timeline. Obviously, the New Zealand officials will be working closely with the Australian officials to piece that together. There are a variety of different scenarios as to who could have infected who, which of course I want them to investigate all of those, not make any assumptions.
The alert came because an Australian pilot who had been on board later tested positive for COVID. Queensland Chief Health Officer Jeanette Young says he developed symptoms on the 31st of July and thinks he caught it on board.
Now we've got this information from New Zealand about the ship that he piloted. He came off that ship on the 23rd of July and we think that's probably where he acquired it.
She believes that is what has now sparked an issue in Cairns.
Then that taxi driver took the pilot to the airport on the 26th of July, and we know through whole genome sequencing that those two are linked. But that was before we thought he was infectious, which is why he wasn't picked up on contact tracing.
Back on board, the foreign crew members on the ship remain asymptomatic, and the vessel is still anchored off the coast of Tauranga. The Ministry of Health says a decision about where it goes next is yet to be made. Mr. Hipkins says it's difficult to tell whether any mistakes have been made regarding the changing advice from authorities.
The advice I've had at the moment is that there were three main entities involved: Customs, the local medical officer of health, and the Ministry of Health. And so exactly who said what to whom and who advised what to whom, that's exactly what I want to know, and at the moment I haven't got a clear picture of that.
Mr. Hipkins says he's not impressed.
One of the things that I am a bit frustrated by is that this information does seem to have been late in being shared. So I only first found out about this on Sunday night, for example. So I've got some questions there, and we'll be looking pretty closely at who knew what and when.
The minister says crew members coming to New Zealand ports are not regularly tested, but all ships are treated as if they have COVID, and infection prevention protocols are followed. The local public health unit, Toi Te Ora, confirmed that 72 port workers boarded the vessel while it was docked in Tauranga. Mr. Hipkins also said ports will have to meet the September vaccination deadline. General Secretary at the Rail and Maritime Transport Union, Wayne Butson, says officials need to learn from the botched advice.
As a union, we would hope that the authorities have learnt some lessons here and we won't end up with a repeat of the on again, off again, on again, off again type process that we had with this ship.
The Ministry of Health is asking port workers, their close contacts and the Tauranga community to remain vigilant and follow all health advice.
Kia ora, e te iwi e haere ake nei a checkpoint, a call to routinely test foreign ship crews before they dock at New Zealand ports. The National Party's internal split over the gay conversion therapy ban. A drunken teenage party hangout in Otago gets slapped with a booze ban. Homai o whakaaro, we'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. Genesis Chief Executive Mark England has told Checkpoint the company is being scapegoated by Energy Minister Megan Woods. Ms Woods has blamed last night's power cuts on commercial decisions by electricity companies, including Genesis and Transpower. Mr England says Genesis actually lost more than $1 million yesterday, and it was an operational, not a commercial decision to have less supply. He also says Transpower should have given more warning, and Genesis is just one of several companies which share accountability. The Rio de la Plata will not be allowed to dock at Napier until all crew have tested negative for COVID-19. 11 of the container ship's 21 crew, which berthed at Tauranga for 4 days, have returned positive results. The ship is now anchored off the coast and a decision will be made this week about where it will go. A spokesperson for Napier Port says all staff are vaccinated, but that doesn't include customs staff and stevedores. The COVID-19 response minister is frustrated that he got only piecemeal information from officials about what happened with the Rio de la Plata. More than 90 Port of Tauranga workers spent time on board the vessel and only 9 of them were fully vaccinated. Chris Hipkins says 3 main agencies made decisions: Customs, Local Public Health and the Ministry of Health. The Climate Change Minister says this country's response to climate change over the past 30 years has been woeful, and the latest IPCC report should be a wake-up call. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report warns the world could heat by 1.5 degrees Celsius in just 10 years, much more quickly than predicted. James Shaw says it underscores the need for urgent action. The head of Cycling New Zealand has paid tribute to Olympian Olivia Podmore, who died suddenly yesterday. Podmore competed at the Rio Olympics and the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games in 2018. Cycling New Zealand Chief Executive Jacques Landry says he's deeply saddened by her death. It's 5:35. Those are your news headlines. More news and sport at 6.
Kia ora, e hoa no mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa and nai nei, ko Nona Peltier, who's in the studio to talk business. Okay, changes designed to improve competition in the fuel market. Now, they take effect from tomorrow. Wow, is the price going to go down at the pump?
I doubt it, because the prices of, the prices have been up for a while. I mean, considering, about a year ago, we were in lockdown. We were just going into lockdown. It was like the eve of the Auckland lockdown. But in June of that, or April of that year, when the world was coming to grips with COVID, they were turning tankers away. The price of oil was $19+ US dollars a barrel. And today it's, about 70. So if you're thinking that the price has gone up, you would be right. But then again, we're in extraordinary times. And so at the moment, though, the prices are moving down again because there's concern about the Delta variant and what that might do to demand for oil. So the price of oil fluctuates. But what the Commerce Commission is hoping to do with these changes is to make the disclosure of pricing more transparent for consumers, so that you drive by the petrol station, you can see the prices advertised, a wholesale rate at the gate, that there won't be restrictions. People will be able to, at the wholesale price, be able to buy the petrol at the cheapest price, whatever their competitors are getting it at. There won't be restrictive supply agreements, and there'll be a disputes resolution as well. So those kinds of things are fundamental. And in the past, people did feel that they were being ripped off at the pump. Now, at least, they'll be able to see what the prices are. There'll be a lot more transparency in that industry. But yes, the prices definitely have gone up in the past year.
Okay, let's move on to the ratings agency S&P, and it's brightened the outlook for a return of international travel.
Yes.
Really, that's interesting, off the back of your airport story yesterday.
Yes, well, it's just come through. Standard & Poor's have released a ratings update on Auckland Airport. And what they're saying is that Auckland Airport's doing pretty well. It's saying that, for example, its total traffic, that's domestic and international, is about 40 to 50% of what it was pre-COVID. But they're expecting that from the middle of next year, there should be a meaningful increase in international travel. Now, that's earlier than almost anybody else. In fact, yesterday when I was speaking to the chief executive of Auckland Airport, he was expecting that to be at least 18 months away. We're now talking about something that's less than a year. So that's very positive if it comes to pass. Of course, if it comes to pass. It's always the big if question.
The rider. Okay.
And anyways, as a result of that, Auckland Airport was among the all other big generators, power generators other than Genesis, to rise about 1% today in the market, which is pretty good because the rest of Asia wasn't looking so hot. So we finished up 0.5% or 63 points up to 12,764. And the New Zealand dollar is a bit weaker, and that's because really it's the US dollar story. It's a lot stronger because people are starting to feel that the US Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates sooner than later. It's a lot of mixed messaging out there. So we're at 69.7 US cents, 95.2 Australian. That's still quite strong against the Australian dollar, and 50.4 pence, which is quite steady as where we've been for a while.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with Business. A call for crew on board foreign ships to be tested for COVID before they dock in New Zealand ports. More than 90 workers at Tauranga port were originally stood down and told to get tested after spending time on the container ship Rio de la Plata, which was carrying crew infected with COVID-19. The Rio crew members were eventually tested, but only as part of entry requirements for going to Napier. And that was where the ship was headed next. Those tests revealed 11 of those on board were positive. Now, Captain Ian McLeod is Vice President of the Merchant Service Guild, and they represent pilots, deck officers and masters, and he joins me now. Ian, what do you reckon the policy should be around testing crews on these foreign freighters and any other vessels coming to New Zealand?
Without hesitation, test a lot of them. Napier instigated this protocol back in November last year as a result of the Ken Ray, and it's very sound and it's probably the right thing to do.
Is Napier the only port that pre-tests the crew on these ships?
In my experience, yes. I haven't. The ports I've been around New Zealand, no, they haven't tested any of them. Calling in Fiji, you get tested. They don't do a PCR test, but they'll do a temperature and just a general well-being check.
So, in terms of freighters, for example, at what point should this crew be tested? What would be the most practical solution?
There's a point in one of the border orders saying that they'll test after 12 days if you want to go ashore. It's 12 days from leaving your last port, and then 14 days after that. So essentially, you've done your MIQ in the on the ship. But really, you should be testing on arrival. The sooner we know about the better.
So before stevedores and the pilot get on board the visiting ship?
It can be done. With a bit of planning, you can get people out there, test them while they're at anchor. At the moment, there's 9 ships off Tauranga at anchorage. Won't take much to get somebody out there with some swabs and test them and get it all found out before they come alongside.
So there's a queue at the moment to get into the port, in essence?
Yes. Well, there was 9 ships when I looked this afternoon, so I don't know what the current situation is.
So do we know how long Rio was waiting off the port to come in here, and whether it would have been an opportunity to test them then?
No, I'm not sure. I know that prior to coming to New Zealand, she was in Malaysia, Singapore, did through the Great Barrier and down to Sydney. But no, I don't actually have the actual dates.
There seems to have been a lot of mixed messaging around this ship and whether it was safe to go on board and then not, and then it was and then it wasn't again. How do your members think this has been handled?
I think there's definite room for improvement. From what we've heard, the pilots are very professional in their approach and they would be taking every precaution. But there's always room for improvement, and we only need one person to get infected and the genie's out of the bottle.
There are a lot of government agencies involved here: Customs, Maritime New Zealand, health officials, Ministry of Health. So which organisation has let them down?
I don't know. It'd be like throwing a dart at a board. I think Customs are probably the most responsible ones to deal with because they have the overview. And because the way the health response is segmented down to the DHBs, again, you've got 14 DHBs around the country. One port officer doesn't talk to the other one.
So do you have a clear understanding of how the protocol should work?
How it should work, or how...
how it should work.
So when the ships arrive in New Zealand, the companies will declare that they're clear of COVID and any disease. In this case, because these guys were what they call it, not symptomatic, the ship's captain wouldn't have known. The only way you'll do it is through testing.
So what about vaccinations for crews? What do you think the policy should be around allowing these freight ships to unload here and their crews? Should they have to be vaccinated?
I think that's going to be coming. We did ask to try and vaccinate the crew of the ship that I was on. She's Hong Kong registered, and we were just told that, in the queue, New Zealanders first, and after we've vaccinated New Zealanders, then we'd look to do others. But you can understand that would cause huge problems from a optics point of view.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Captain Ian McLeod, who is the Vice President of the Merchant Service Guild. Cycling New Zealand says it's deeply saddened by the death of Rio Olympic cyclist Olivia Podmore and denies it failed her. The 24-year-old sprint cyclist died suddenly in Cambridge yesterday. She'd earlier posted an emotional message, which has since been deleted on social media, talking about the pressures of high-performance sport. It comes after a damning report into the national cycling body in 2018, which spoke of a toxic culture, bullying, a lack of accountability and effective leadership. Chief Executive of Cycling New Zealand, Jacques Landry, came into the role after the report. Fronting at a press conference this afternoon alongside the CEO of Sport New Zealand, Raylene Castle, he said the organisation will be looking at how Podmore was treated.
For us, it's a question of focusing right now on the well-being of the people that are here and having to deal with this loss. There'll be a time for us to actually review and looking at if and where we would have had missteps or where we didn't act properly. But at this point in time, the focus is to focus on our people right now.
He says all top athletes are offered psychological support through their career.
Olivia was not an exception. She had a lot of people supporting her through her career, and so what we're doing is just looking back at what was that support? We know there was a lot of support, and we want to take a step back and look at and review that. But at this point in time, again, our focus is really to actually make sure that the people that we have here, our athletes, our staff, and the families are well taken care of.
CEO of Sport New Zealand, Raylene Castle, says the mental health of top athletes is incredibly challenging.
And I really wish that we could have a black and white and a right and wrong answer for it. But unfortunately, it's not like that. Even when you put the best level of support around a young athlete with an open door into psychological services, into anonymous psychological services, and offer all of those opportunities, sometimes they reach out. And we know that Olivia had been reaching out into those environments and gaining that support. And why are we here? That's the question that we'd all like the answer to.
Olivia was not selected for the Tokyo Olympics, despite saying in her social media post that she had qualified. Jacques Landry says extra support is being provided for the team who did go, many of whom are now in MIQ.
We're trying to keep a finger on the pulse of everyone, as I mentioned before, and Raylene's mentioned that before as well. We have the Olympic, our cyclists and staff that are just, touched down into Christchurch this morning, processed through MIQ in Christchurch. There's some, there were some additional layers with regards to how we, because we did, I think there's obviously a plan in place to actually be able to manage the what we call the post-Olympic blues already in place, and now there's an additional layer that's been added to that to ensure that the well-being of the staff and athletes that are coming off. And as concerning everybody else, again, we're trying to person by person just tick off the list and make sure that they're okay.
The Chief Executive of Cycling New Zealand, Jacques Landry. It is 17 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki ina pita kōrero. After the news at 6, we'll hear from the Energy Minister, Megan Woods. A man who punched a young MMA fighter in the head has been sentenced to 6 months home detention. Fao Vake died later, and his friend has likened the sentence to a COVID restriction, not justice. 29-year-old Ofahimoni Falau pleaded guilty to 2 charges of assaulting with intent to injure. Jordan Bond reports.
Fao Vake and his brother Ika were attacked early on a Sunday morning in May by Ofa Falau and the Crown says 3 others who had been drinking at a bar in central Auckland. Vake was hit in the head, including by Falau 3 times. Justice Robinson said Falau's associates and the 2 Vake brothers got tangled up.
After assaulting Ika, you ran towards Leofau, who was being held by one of your associates nearby, and you struck him 3 times in the head with a closed fist. Following subsequent assaults inflicted by others, Leofau was rendered unconscious. He was taken to hospital and required surgery to relieve pressure on his brain, and tragically he died 9 days later.
Dan Hooker, a friend of Fau Vake and fellow MMA athlete, says the Vake brothers did not aggravate the situation at all. They were trying to get away.
That was an attack. There was 4 attack 2 Vake brothers through. Did nothing aggressive, didn't say anything aggressive, were backing away the entire time, trying to escape. They were cornered. Being part of that attack, you stay at home for 6 months. It's not fair. It's not good enough.
Neither the Crown nor the defence argued that Folau was responsible for Fau's death, and the judge accepted that. 3 others were charged in relation to the death, including one with manslaughter. They pleaded not guilty and will go to trial next year. Dan Hooker believes Folau should have been jailed.
Being part of an attack that took a man's life, 6 months stay at home, it's COVID restrictions. And for you to not serve time in prison is an absolute joke, in my opinion. 6 months home detention, a man is dead. He's got a daughter, he's got a family.
Justice Robinson said Folau said he was drunk at the time and had alcohol problems, but that is no excuse, and the law does not allow intoxication to be used as a mitigating factor for an offender. He noted Folau pleaded guilty early, which entitles him to a 25% discount on the final sentence, and regarded his risk of reoffending as low before sentencing him to home detention. Folau's lawyer, Baden Meyer, said the actions were a one-off aberration, that Folau had expressed deep regret, remorse and shame, and is the first and last time he'll be involved in something like this.
A lot of you were getting in touch about our earlier story on the power outages last night. We had an interview with Genesis and also Transpower. This person says, I've worked in the energy industry and I totally agree with what Genesis has said. It's a Transpower issue. Natalie says, wow, how is our energy sector so broken that Genesis had no notice that customers would experience power outages? Doesn't add up, she says. Another listener says, the telling point for me was his continuous focus on having enough power for Genesis customers. This is the CEO of Genesis. I read Transpower's market warning as a call to arms to all players that there wasn't enough power to meet the nation's needs. It sounds like there was more than enough time to stand up the third Huntley Rankine, the boiler. It seems like a clear case of market failure to me. And this one too, I'm a Genesis customer who lost power last night, during which I could not find my medication in the dark. I'm looking forward to a response that is more than just words from the CEO. I think Genesis doesn't understand service to its people. The relationship is a power imbalance. Thanks for all your feedback. Do keep it coming. You can text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The National Party's Liberal and Conservative factions are strained as the party reckons with voting against a ban on gay conversion therapy. National was the only political party that didn't support the legislation through its first reading last week. It was a caucus decision, but it's now clear not all National MPs agreed on voting against the ban. Our political reporter, Annika Smith, has more.
When it comes to gay conversion therapy, National MPs believe it's wrong.
The caucus position has always been that gay conversion therapy is abhorrent.
We oppose conversion therapy and I'm happy with that.
Anything that's coercive, unwanted, or there's an element of physicality, definitely out.
And there is no way we would support gay conversion therapy.
But ask these same MPs about the government's proposed ban on conversion therapy, and it's not so simple.
This bill is very complicated. There are some issues with it, and we chose a different path.
As Simon Bridges and others have set out, we had questions about the circumstances in which parents could be subjected to prosecution.
We've identified the bits that we're nervous about on behalf of those who might be criminalised for having a conversation, in particular the parent bit.
The National Party's primary concern is that the proposed ban on gay conversion therapy could land some parents in court. Today, MPs were pressed on why the party didn't support the legislation through its first reading on principle before using a select committee process to iron out the details. East Coast Bay's MP Erica Stanford lays blame at the government's feet.
Chris Farfoy was the one who couldn't answer any of those questions when he was the one discussing his own bill. So he's the one who set the cat amongst the pigeons with the public and politicians as well, not being able to clearly say that parents would not be criminalised.
Chris Pink, one of National's more conservative MPs, points out the legislation would have passed its first reading, with or without National's support.
It goes forward with or without us. They've got the numbers already.
Chris Bishop's voting preference was made public after a conversation on Twitter in which he admitted he hated his vote on the conversion therapy ban was published. Mr Bishop wouldn't repeat this on today's caucus run, reiterating his certainty the legislation can be shaped into a form National will support.
I'm confident that we'll be able to get the bill into a shape where the caucus can support it at second and third reading. National definitely does not support conversion therapy. We do want it to be banned. We just want it to be banned in the right way.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's very unlikely parents would be prosecuted for preventing their child from taking hormone blockers under the government's bill.
It is just simply not that simple. And again, you would have to have an Attorney General decide that prosecution is a good idea. I see that as highly unlikely.
Ms Ardern says it's disappointing National is withholding its support over a minor part of the bill that can be worked through at Select Committee.
A stop has been placed on drunken teenage parties at a popular South Island campground with a booze ban put in place. Loch Laird near Otematata is a popular haunt for high school aged students to celebrate the informal end of the school year. But Waitaki District Council is taking a stand, enforcing a temporary alcohol ban to curb bad behaviour over Labour weekend. Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton has more.
Bottles and rocks thrown at cars and camper vans, verbal abuse and cars speeding through the campground. They're among the things that happen when hundreds of teenagers converge on Loch Laird campground to party. Otamatata resident and Ahuriri Community Board Chair Vicky Munro doesn't want students to stop visiting and having fun, but she wants to see the end of alcohol-fuelled bad behaviour.
There were safety issues for the girls, for the boys. Last year, one of the contractors that works in the camps, he got a chili bin thrown at his head. And the rubbish was unbelievable. They need to understand that's antisocial behaviour, and they can still have fun and not come up here and take no responsibility.
In 2003, a 17-year-old Oamaru student died after the car she was travelling in hit a tree while she and her friends were in Otamatata for the long weekend. The community is concerned someone else could die if changes aren't made. Today, the Waitaki District Council unanimously voted to ban alcohol on the upper terrace and between the foreshore of Loch Laird and Wildlife Camp for the entire Labour weekend. It means alcohol cannot be consumed or possessed in an unsealed container. Police will be able to enforce the ban, including the ability to arrest and search. Deputy Mayor Melanie Tavendale moved the motion to enact the ban.
There's been a lot of options looked at, and it's been a bit of a tough one. Displacement is still a concern, but police believe that this will make it a lot easier to manage any issues. It's a really good option to just test this theory and to see how we go. Happy to support us doing that, and that way we can actually have a bit of a regroup afterwards and see what the results were and if it was a theory that works.
According to Oamaru Police, some parents drop off their school-age kids with 12 packs of RTDs on the understanding they'd only drink 4 a day, but all are drunk within hours. One mother staying with her young family said she gave her 9-year-old anti-anxiety medication after witnessing a fight on the track to the toilets. She described the behaviour around the toilets as intimidating, with violence, swearing and vehicles speeding along the road. One Otamatata resident is clear on who should be taking charge.
The parents just sort of leave them, and I think at the end of the day, the parents need to take the responsibility, not the people of the village or the police or the council. I reckon it's a parents' issue.
She's concerned the ban will mean teenagers just move their party and become someone else's problem.
They think it's their right to come up and drink, and So if it's not going to be there, it's going to be somewhere else, and I don't know where else that could be. And if they decided to do it in the village, then that's not good either. So I just think it is the parents' responsibility, and they do need to step up.
An information campaign targeting schools and parents that highlights the risks and the new measures is being planned.
And some of your feedback now, a lot of you getting in touch about the power issue. This listener says this is a clear failure of the free market and shows clearly that critical infrastructure should not be privatised or profit motivated. It's entirely possible this could have also led to deaths due to people being reliant on medical devices that require electricity. Paul from Canterbury's got in touch to say, why did Transpower not ask for voluntary restraint from customers like you do with water if there's a shortage to avoid a blackout? And another person says Genesis is clearly to blame. They run Huntly and chose not to fire it up. And this listener says Genesis CEO completely correct. The power loss was an industry issue with multiple players all contributing to what happens. Megan Woods obviously has no idea how it works and is only interested in deferring focus away from Labour. On the subject of shipping crews, seems like multiple gaps in the system, this person says. How about the shipping lines do their global responsible thing and vaccinate all their crews? Napier insists on pre-testing crews. Why don't the other ports? What's the union doing about getting their members vaccinated?
RNZ News at 6, I'm Marama Tipole. The Chief Executive of Genesis Energy says it's being scapegoated by Energy Minister Megan Woods. This afternoon, the Minister blamed last night's power cuts on commercial decisions made by the electricity companies. She pointed the finger at Genesis Energy in particular for failing to turn on its third generator at Huntly despite having been warned there would be massive demand. But Mark England has told Checkpoint it was an operational decision to have less supply, not a commercial decision.
You know, Genesis is just one of several generators, and we don't have any legal or regulatory accountability for security of supply in New Zealand. Our only accountability is to be sure we can supply our customers. There's probably no single accountability. But Transpower are the company that have the overall visibility of the market and what's going on.
Mark England says the grid operator Transpower did not ask it for more electricity until just after 5 o'clock last night on the cusp of the evening peak demand. Meanwhile, Transpower has assured customers that power won't be intentionally cut again tonight. Its General Manager of Grid Development, John Clark, has told Checkpoint extra generation has been made available. The Rio de la Plata container ship will not be granted permission to dock in Napier until all crew on board the vessel have had negative results for COVID-19. 11 of the 21 crew on the ship, which was berthed at the port of Tauranga for 4 days, have returned positive results. The ship is now anchored off the coast, and where it will go will be decided this week. It was supposed to head to Napier, but a Napier port spokesperson says its border protocol means the vessel isn't allowed to berth. Once negative tests are returned, the ship is welcome to berth. The spokesperson says the port's main priority is keeping everyone at the port and in the community safe. They say all Napier port staff are vaccinated against COVID-19, but that doesn't account for customs staff or stevedores. A Wellington City Councillor says people should direct their energy for fighting climate change into taking to the streets and demanding politicians take action. The most comprehensive UN climate change report yet has found global warming is unfolding more quickly than feared, and humanity is almost entirely to blame. The Deputy Chair of the Council's Environment Committee, Tamitha Paul, says people feel pressured to make the life changes to reduce emissions. Instead, she says they should be putting huge pressure onto the government, which can make far more effective systemic changes. Tamitha Paul says the survival of humanity is at stake. Parliament is holding a special debate about the Dawn raids. It follows the government's formal apology last week for injustices committed against Pasifika peoples during the 1970s. National Party leader Judith Collins says all migrant communities must be looked after.
But we also need to be very aware that this country can be in danger of doing this again, whether it's other migrants that we bring into work and that we then ignore once it becomes an issue.
Judith Collins says the raids brought shame on both the National and Labour governments who enforced them. She says it was unfortunate that the opposition was not invited to speak at the formal apology. New South Wales has recorded another 356 new COVID-19 cases, and around one-third of the cases were infectious while in the community. When asked whether there needs to be a curfew, State Premier Gladys Berejiklian had this response.
We need to accept this is a different variant and you need to approach it in different ways. And can I just finish my sentence on that one? So in relation to that point, based on the health expert advice, vaccination reduces your chance of spreading, it reduces your chance of landing in hospital, and it reduces your chance of dying.
There have been another 3 deaths linked to the Delta strain overnight, and none of the patients were vaccinated. It's 6:04. To sports now, 4 players have earned first-time call-ups to the Silver Ferns as coach Dame Nolene Tauranga eyes next year's Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Mystics shooter Grace Weki, Steel players Tiana Mituaro and Kate Heffernan, and Stars shooter Jamie Hume have been included in a 17-strong squad. Tauranga says the mid-court was the toughest selection area, but she's opted for a more defence-oriented lineup as she feels they have a lack of defence circle options.
Because we're short in that defence end, they've taken more of a defensive centre or slides in regards to players that can play that centre wing defence position, so I can booster up our defence end when we take the court in internationals.
A jigsaw puzzle that's taken several months to complete is how Black Caps coach Gary Stead has described picking his T20 World Cup cricket squad, along with separate squads for tours of Bangladesh and Pakistan. 3 spinners have been named in the T20 squad, with Todd Astle returning alongside Ish Sodhi and Mitchell Santner. All up, 32 players have been named, and Stead says it's a relief to have it finalised.
It's been a jigsaw puzzle that I'm actually really pleased we've got to this stage now. Obviously, you get curveballs thrown at you in the world that we live in now, with, I guess, different things happen and understanding quarantine periods of different countries and what that looks like for people. So I'm pleased we've got to where we are now.
And fans attending English Premier League football will face random spot checks of their COVID-19 status when the season kicks off this weekend. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp resamples the 10 best albums of the year so far. This week's climate question asks, what do we tell the kids about global warming so they don't give up? Which will go nicely with Patrick Phelps from Minerals West Coast. He wonders if our fossil fuel dependency is a supply or demand issue. Given last night's power use, he could be onto something. So join me, Brian Crump, from After the News at 7 on RNZ National.
And taking a look at the weather forecast, was it cold at your place last night, Lisa?
Very
cold. This is the forecast then for this evening and also for tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel in the central high country. A few showers. Clearing south of Auckland tomorrow evening. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine but isolated showers tomorrow afternoon or evening. Whanganui to Wellington and also Wairarapa. Generally fine. Some morning cloud tomorrow and the odd early shower about inland Whanganui and Manawatu. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine, apart from some cloudy areas in Canterbury today with the odd shower in the south. Bulla, Western and Fiordland, occasional rain in Fiordland, cloudy periods, a few showers elsewhere. Otago and Southland partly cloudy with showers becoming isolated this evening. Becoming fine tomorrow, apart from showers about Stewart Island and the Chatham Islands, occasional showers. Southwest gales easing this evening. You're listening to RNZ National at 6:07.
Kia ora marama, no mai hoki mai if you're just joining us. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Energy Ministers, after a please explain, after the lights went out for thousands of customers last night because there wasn't enough power to go around. Households were plunged into darkness when power generators deliberately pulled the plug to manage electricity demand, which had reached an all-time high. Transpower says it warned of a potential shortage and appealed for power generators to power up, but the grid was still short, raising questions about whether some companies were simply trying to push up the price by keeping supply tight. Genesis Chief Executive Mark England takes issue with Energy Minister Megan Woods calling them out.
We feel this is Grossly unfair, the Minister, to single out one company. We're a group of companies that keep the lights on across New Zealand every day. It wasn't a commercial decision, it was an operational decision.
So are you being scapegoated by the Minister?
Oh, absolutely.
So you do not accept the criticism that she has levelled at you, one iota? None of it?
Absolutely not.
Not one bit of it?
Well, other than our part in a market that has let customers down.
Ko taku manuhiria nai nei, ko Megan Woods, the Minister for Energy. She joins me now. Tēnā koe e te minita.
Good evening, Lisa. Tēnā koe.
So the Genesis boss there reckons he's being scapegoated by you. Are you scapegoating Genesis?
Oh, look, absolutely not. I think the critical question that all New Zealanders wanted answered when they woke up this morning, and last night actually when this was happening, was this a physical deficit that we had in terms of generation? Did we simply not have the ability to generate the amount of electricity that New Zealanders needed to keep the heater on and the lights on? Or was there something else at work? Were there commercial and market considerations that were leading people to make decisions? And what became really clear after I met with both the EA, Transpower this morning, and also wrote to the chief executives, and who were really great in responding and getting information back to me, I have to say that actually some decisions were made based on market settings as they are at the moment, that there wasn't going to be a requirement for that third Rankine at Huntly that Genesis had. Look, I don't think anyone should.
So why do you think, sorry to interrupt, Minister, because it's important, why do you think there were commercial imperatives at play here? Because Mark England says they lost more than $1 million yesterday, right? And the decision not to fire up that third coal generator was basically logistics. They didn't get a direct call to do it, and there wouldn't have been enough time, he reckons.
Yeah, look, all the really critical questions. So what we do know is that Transpower put out the kind of notice at 6:42 a.m. yesterday. We know that to fire up the Rankine, switch, simply turn it on and it starts generating straight away. It takes 6 to 10 hours. But that first notice saying that, look, we're going to have a peak tonight that's going to require some more generation went out at 6:42 a.m. yesterday morning. Another one went out around 1 p.m. So there still was time there to do it. What I'm interested in, and certainly not scapegoating anybody, but actually getting to the bottom of why it is, whether you call it market, you call it commercial, whatever, that an assessment was made that we weren't going to need that additional capacity, that extra 240 megawatts that could have come on with the Huntly Rankine that would have got us through last night.
Okay, Minister, there's a couple of things there. There's a couple of things there. Why are you just naming Genesis if you're not scapegoating them?
Because that's the critical piece that could have been turned on quickly. The other piece that was available that wasn't utilised was the Taramaki combined cycle, which would have offered 350 megawatts of generation capacity. But that does take around 3 days to turn on. That's not something that could have been turned on in the timeline that we've got in front of us. But the call went out at 6:42 a.m. Yesterday morning saying that we were going to have this problem sort of, 12, 13, 14 hours down the track. Who can generate some more? The only real option for bringing on any more generation was that Huntly third Rankine.
Right.
And it's not singling out Genesis. It is simply,
Minister,
we have to get to the bottom of what happened.
Genesis says its responsibility is to its customers. It doesn't have a legal responsibility to be involved with the surety of supply. And it also says it was not directly asked to take any particular action, that there was just a general warning. What are your expectations? Should they have acted immediately and fired up that generation based on the warning that went out at around 6 o'clock? Because they say not.
And look, these are all really good questions and ones that I've been talking to officials about all day. Now, look, I absolutely accept that Genesis can only see what's happening in its own business. It doesn't have the ability to look across the system. That is the system operator's role. So I absolutely accept that, and I think that's a really fair point from Mark.
So have you misspoken today when you've singled them out publicly?
No, absolutely not. When we had to answer the question of was this a physical constraint on our ability to generate electricity, which was the question that New Zealanders rightly wanted answered this morning, the answer is no, because there was actually the physical capacity to generate more electricity, but that wasn't brought up because of market/commercial setup. So,
Minister, I know you have to go.
But Lisa, I do want to answer the question that you asked me. Do I think that we've got the right setup in the market? Did Genesis get all the information it needed in order to turn on that Huntley Rankin yesterday? That's a critical question, and one that I'm seeking further advice from officials on.
Do customers deserve compensation from these power companies?
Look, that isn't a question that I've considered today. What my time has been concerned about today is seeking assurances that this isn't going to be the case tonight, that we are going to get through this evening without a repeat performance. So what
are you going to say to market?
Genuinely put any consideration into that question today.
What are you going to say to Genesis Chief Executive when you see him tomorrow?
So, look, I really want to have a conversation around what information he would need from the system operator in order to make that decision early enough to turn on that third Rankin so that we can have New Zealanders having the heater on. I think that's really a critical point.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Megan Woods, the Energy Minister there. While personal choices matter, the government is being told all the real power to fight climate change is in its hands. And a young Wellington climate leader and city councillor says individuals' energy should be directed at making sure those in power are doing everything they can to hold back climate catastrophe. Hamish Cardwell fired this report.
The new comprehensive UN climate report makes for terrifying reading. Without a doubt, humans are causing global warming. And without fast and massive reductions in emissions, within little more than a decade, the planet could warm to a level that could see frequent and catastrophic fires, droughts, floods and cyclones. Wellingtonians are worried.
I think we're too late, yes.
As a young person as well, growing up and seeing the world literally come down, it sucks.
19-year-old Tyler only walks and takes public transport and spent years eating no meat, only having it occasionally now.
Reducing waste is definitely a big one, like plastic and all that kind of stuff. Just the basic things that I suppose most people do.
Vicky has ramped up her environmental efforts.
There's certainly things we do now that I wouldn't have thought I'd be doing 5 years ago. Instead of buying fizzy drinks, we've eliminated that. I make my own kombucha, so we use recycled bottles, like glass bottles. So that's eliminated a huge amount of plastic.
But Lars says there's only so much change individuals can make.
I really do think at the mass scale it is the government's responsibility, because that's where they can enact the most change, put policies and regulations on certain businesses.
And Lars has a point. A 2017 study shows just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. Young Wellington City Councillor and Environment Committee Deputy Chair Tamitha Paul says governments have failed to invest in things like green transport and alternative energy needed to make real change.
People need to get outraged about the irresponsible decision-making and the lack of urgency with which this government is treating this catastrophic issue. Not feel like, oh my God, if I don't catch the bus and go vegan tomorrow, the world's going to end. No, this government has not done enough to enable you to make the changes and live the lifestyle that we need to live.
Tamitha Paul says it is about the survival of humanity. She says people's energy is best spent making real noise, taking to the streets and demanding the government takes action.
It's about actual political organising and activating in order to put way more pressure on decision makers and powers everywhere to actually take this issue seriously.
So what will make a difference? A tenth of the country's total greenhouse gas emissions come from private transport, rising 14% since 2014, growing faster than dairy and manufacturing sector emissions. Greater Wellington Regional Council Climate Committee Chair Thomas Nash says there's little point encouraging people to make personal changes when the current system prevents them making green choices easily. He says to meet the country's climate obligations, billions needs to be invested in linking housing and transport infrastructure.
We need more housing close to public transport routes and stations and close to where people can do their work. If we do that, then people, first of all, need to travel less because maybe they can walk to work or they can wheel to work or take a bike or a bus or whatever.
20-year-old Sophie Hanford holds the climate change portfolio at Kapiti Coast District Council. She says climate fear paralyses people and has this advice for the people who ask what they can do.
It's actually just slowing down, being conscious,
taking each decision and as it kind of comes. So whether you're leaving the house and you're deciding how to get to work every one morning, or whether you're deciding what to eat on any given day, or all of those kinds of things.
Sophie Hanford says if people can stay engaged and demand politicians and businesses make change, then collectively we can make a huge impact.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's a code red for the New Zealand Blood Service. About 30,000 people a year need the life-saving gift of blood and plasma. And the service needs more people to put their hands up and arms out to keep up with demand. Joining me now is Aska Burge, spokesperson for New Zealand Blood. Kia ora, how much blood do you need extra to what you're getting?
Well, currently we need to collect over 4,000 donations every week, and that's a mix of blood as well as plasma, and that demand is continued to grow. Particularly in plasma, we're seeing about a 8 to 12% increase in demand year on year, so it is a big mountain to climb, and that's why we're asking people to step up and become blood donors.
What's causing that massive jump in demand?
It's a range of things, particularly with plasma. It makes up to 11 different blood products, and therefore it helps obviously a range of conditions. But a lot of those are also lifelong, which means it's not sort of a one-off. Have an accident, have a transfusion. It is actually every week get a transfusion for the rest of your life, and it's those products that we're trying to make sure that we have in supply, and that's through blood donors.
So is plasma becoming used in more circumstances as well, thus increasing the demand, or is it just that we have more people needing these products for a lifetime?
It's a bit of both, to be honest. And, we're looking at how we can obviously increase our plasma donor panel, and we've put a plasma mobile into the Auckland area. We've reduced some of the eligibility criteria for becoming a plasma donor. And so we really encourage people to go to our website, do our eligibility quiz and find out whether you can give blood or whether you can give plasma, and then make an appointment to become a regular donor.
Has there been a slowdown in people donating?
Right now, only about under 4% of the population donate, and we are asking to get maybe another 30,000 donors just to make sure that we've got the right number of donors of our panel. We're not calling upon the same donors over and over, particularly over winter. People get sick. So our regular donors, they have to be deferred for a time. So we're really wanting people to step up to make sure that the blood is always on the shelves for all those unseen emergencies that happen every day.
Why do you reckon it's so low, that percentage of people who donate? Is it because it kind of gives some people the heebies, the thought of giving blood?
I think it's a combination of things. I mean, we know that people understand the need, but it has to feel closer to home. And that's why, we've launched this new campaign which reflects these everyday scenarios that where New Zealanders need blood or plasma. And
tell us about those scenarios. Tell us some of them.
Yeah, so some of them, it's a young basketball player. He has a blood nose that won't stop bleeding. It's a father that collapses over dinner and suddenly, rush to hospital and realise he's got blood cancer. So these are things that are happening, and they're based on real life stories that we've been told by families around New Zealand. And we're just sort of wanting to highlight that, giving blood is a future promise to save someone's life. So it's there when it's needed, and a lot of these stories don't make the news, but it is happening every day.
Aska, I'm wondering if we need to incentivise people to donate. And I'm not talking about paying them. I'm talking about, how some workplaces will give people a morning off or a couple of hours off to do something that they consider as contributing to the community. Would you encourage that kind of incentive for people to come and give blood?
Absolutely. I mean, we do have a Team Red group donation program, and through that we have currently companies around New Zealand who do allow their staff time off during work hours, and we would love for more businesses to allow the same. A blood donation takes about 60 minutes, a plasma donation about an hour and a half, and plus travel on top of that. So we do understand it is time out of the day, but if more companies could allow their staff time off during the day to give, it will make it much easier. Because we do know that convenience, the ability to get to one of our centres or one of our blood drives, is a barrier for people to donate.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That is Aska Burge, who is spokesperson for New Zealand Blood. To New South Wales now, where more of the state has gone into a snap lockdown after infectious people visited. It means the state is now in its most widespread lockdown since the early days of the COVID pandemic, with fears the Delta variant has escaped into many regions. But while some regional communities are in lockdown, others have narrowly escaped stay-at-home orders, causing confusion and unease, as the ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
As large parts of regional New South Wales went into lockdown overnight, Steve Moore was putting most of his business ventures on hold. He's in the small town of Manila, which is in the newly locked down Tamworth local government area. And while his kitchen manufacturing plant will stay open, his cafe and his wife's beauty salon won't.
We just don't think it'll be viable just to do takeaway only. So, yeah, I think we'll just shut down for a week and the girls are down there cleaning up and hopefully they'll just be back open on Tuesday morning as normal.
The Tamworth lockdown was triggered by an infectious person who travelled to the inland city from Newcastle last week. A separate case has also triggered a lockdown for a large part of the North Coast region, including Byron Bay, Ballina, Lismore and Richmond Valley. In the Tamworth area, which had been COVID-free since April last year, Steve Moore reckons locals aren't leaving anything to chance.
When the government's told us that we have to do certain things, everybody sort of does the right thing. So, we're definitely, vigilant about it, that we don't want it here, put it that way.
Just down the street at the Manila Bowling Club, all but a couple of staff have been stood down because of the stay-at-home orders. But President Noel Edgar could see this coming after the nearby city of Armidale went into its own lockdown on the weekend.
As you can see, the result of Sydney supposedly being a bit late. The government mightn't think that, but as it turned out, it is a bit late. Armidale jumped in as soon as they got their case and locked down. And I think when Newcastle got out of hand a bit, well, they bit the bullet and did that too. So I think it is possibly necessary, but it's just a strain on all the smaller businesses and clubs and things here up in this area.
But other regional communities have escaped lockdown, like the Uralla Shire, even though it's sandwiched between Armidale and Tamworth. Nevertheless, Samantha Kaufman has decided to close her floristry shop in Uralla for the week.
My customer base is largely in Armidale and I can't deliver flowers into Armidale because we're not the same local government area.
You're in that sort of local government area that fits between the two others that are in lockdown. Does it seem odd that you're not in lockdown at this point?
It does seem odd because Uralla is very closely linked to Armidale and we've been to Armidale since the 29th of July, which would probably be most people in Uralla. We are supposed to be all self-isolating. So all the businesses, the non-essential services have closed their doors in Uralla for safety reasons because, we just really need to keep everyone safe. And in a small community where we know so many people, it's hard, it's tough.
Switzerland is famous for its pristine alpine environment, its cleanliness, its safety, but can appearances be deceptive? The BBC's Imogen Folks reports from one Swiss village that is literally sitting on a time bomb.
In Switzerland's beautiful Kander Valley, in the tiny village of Mitholz, Sven Meyer is enjoying his garden.
When I sit here in my garden, I see a lot of very beautiful mountains. I see a small river, the nature, no streets, no buildings.
Sadly for Sven, he and his neighbours have to abandon this alpine idyll.
We have some trouble here in our village with old
ammunition.
Ammunition, yes. They have to remove it from the mountain and so we have to leave it.
How much ammunition?
I think they tell us about 3,500 tons.
Those tons of ammunition deep in the mountain above Mitholz are a relic from the Second World War, when Switzerland tried to arm itself against invasion. In the winter of 1947, part of the ammunition exploded.
Die Felswand über den Munitionskammern ist auf 100 Meter Länge eingestürzt.
The blast was felt 100 miles away in Zurich. The village was destroyed. The snow turned black. 9 people died. After the explosion, the army reassured the villagers everything was safe, and the houses here were lovingly rebuilt. I'm standing in front of one of them now that bears the date 1948 and the proud inscription, "Out of the horror I'm made new. Come in and be welcome." 70 years later, Claudia Schmidt is raising her family and her chickens in an environment she believed was perfect.
It was a dream for us living here. We wanted to give our children a life in nature, the way we grew up. But now we don't know what will happen. We invested a lot in our house. I'll show you our brand new kitchen in a minute. It's hard, really hard to think we have to leave.
Last year came shock news. Geological tests showed the ammunition wasn't safe. All 3,500 tonnes will have to be removed piece by piece. That will take at least 10 years. The villagers have until 2025 to get out. Claudia doesn't know where she'll go yet.
Last night there was a huge bang. It was a thunderstorm. Still, I got up and looked at the mountain. I always felt safe here. Now, who knows?
And before we head off, some of your feedback on blood donations. This person says a good number of us would love to give blood but can't because we lived in the UK during mad cow disease. Good point. Another person says bring back the bloodbath. That's about the convenience of it, I suppose, and being able to do it quickly and efficiently. And another person's got in touch to say I'm a regular plasma donor, but maybe it is time to review the list of things that prevent you giving blood. Thanks for your feedback. It's almost all of we've got time for this evening. Nights and lately will keep you updated through the evening. Ko te kaupapa tuatahia pōpō on First Up from 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, reopening the borders after COVID-19. The team has details of Professor David Skegg's advice to the government, which will be released tomorrow morning. Kaua e wari te atatiro I a mātou kōrero. Don't forget you can check out our videos and stories online. Kia pai tōpō, have a great evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Transpower has assured customers that power won't be cut again tonight because extra generation has been made available. Energy Minister Megan Woods has told Checkpoint she's not